On the road that runs from Arles to the quarries of Fontevielle, past the Mont de Cord and the Abbey of Montmajour, there arises, above and a little to the right of a large village, a small hill crowned with green pines. High up there, the sails of the windmills are forever turning. Down below nestles a large white house, the manor house of Montmajour, a strange old dwelling, which starts as a chateau with its flights of steps, its terrace colonnaded in the Italian style, and which finishes with farmhouse walls, perches for peacocks, vines over the doorway, and a sheepfold next to a field of slender almond trees, whose pink blossoms are too quickly scattered by the winds of March. An old Provençal family lived there 20 years ago, no less unusual and charming than their dwelling. The mother, very old but still erect under the widow's bonnets she always wore, managed alone this considerable domain of olive groves, wheat fields, vineyards, mulberry plantations. With her, her 4 sons, known by the professions they had followed or were still following, the mayor, the consul, the notary, and the advocate. After the death of their father, all 4 had rallied round the old woman, united in their exclusive love of her whom they called their chère maman. So many times in winter have I gone there to cure myself of Paris and its fevers in the health-giving air of the little hills of our Provence. I would arrive without warning, sure of the welcome of chère maman, who held me close to her little grey-checked shawl as if I were one of her boys. 5 minutes of tumultuous excitement, then, the embracings over and my trunk in my room, I would climb up to my windmill. A ruined windmill, a crumbling pile of stones and old wooden beams, which had not turned in the wind for many years. From the first day I saw it, this abandoned outcast of a windmill had been dear to me. I loved it for its distressed condition, for its path lost under the herbs. I loved it for its crumbling platform, where it was good to idle the hours away, sheltered from the wind, while a rabbit bobbed up and down close by, or a long grass snake went its aloof and tortuous way as it pursued the field mice which swarmed around the tumble-down mill. I do not know from where I have derived this liking for deserted places. Whatever the reason, I owe a great deal to such spiritual retreats, and none did me so much good as this old windmill in Provence. My windmill never belonged to me, but that used never to prevent me from passing long days there, days of dreams and memories, until the hour when the winter sun would set, and I used to return for the evening meal at the hospitable and fantastic table at Montmajour, where each served himself according to his settled habits and tastes. Coffee over, pipes lit, the 4 sons gone off to the village, I would stay alone to talk with that excellent old lady, with her subtle mind, and her memory full of tales which she told with simple eloquence. Weary of talking, she would sink back in her great armchair. The shades of another falling night would close her sunken eyelids, invading her old, deeply lined face. Then I would quietly go away to spend the rest of my evening in the kitchen. Sometimes my fancy would lead me roaming on little excursions around my windmill. It might be a shooting or a fishing trip to the Camargue, that pampas-like corner of Provence where the oxen and the wild horses are allowed to roam unfettered and free. Another day I would go and join my friends, the Provençal poets, the Faits Libres. We used to go to the Céliscon, and, lying in the grass between the grey stone tombs, listen to some fine play by Théodore Aubanel, ironically accompanied by the banging hammers of the railway workshops from behind a curtain of lustreless trees. After the reading, we would stroll along the Lys to watch the proud, coquettish girls of Arles pass by under their little white caps, for the love of one of whom poor Jan killed himself. We would have supper at Cornille's inn, and all the evening we would wander on, singing songs, through the little rambling side streets, past crumbling walls, remains of flights of steps and broken columns. And how good it was, after one of these lyrical escapades, to come back to the windmill and dream of the book I would write one day, a book into which I would put all those songs still singing in my head, all that bright laughter, and all those enchanting legends. It is in my windmill that I am now writing to you, my door wide open, the sun pouring in. In front of me, a wood of beautiful pines descends to the foot of the hill. In the far distance, the lesser Alps raise their delicate crests. There is no sound, only, sometimes near, sometimes far away, the sound of a fife, a curlew in the lavender, mule bells on the road. All the beauty of this Provençal countryside is born of the sun. It lives by light. Why, then, should you wish me to regret Paris, your noisy, dirty Paris? It is so perfect here in my mill. The corner I have been looking for, a small, warm, sweet-scented corner, 1,000 leagues from newspapers, cabs, fogs. The lovely things all around me here. It is hardly a week since I settled in here, yet already I am brimful with impressions and memories. Just listen to this. It was the day I came here. I had caught the Beaucaire stagecoach, an old ramshackle conveyance which hasn't a long way to go before it finds its final home, but which dawdles along the roads in order to look as if it had come a long distance when it arrives in the evening. There were 5 of us on the outside, not counting the driver. First, a man from the Camargue, squat, hairy, smelling of the world, with large bloodshot eyes and silver rings in his ears. Then 2 men from Beaucaire, a baker and his journeyman, both very red-faced, very wheezy, but with superb profiles, 2 Roman medallions with the head of Vitellius. Lastly, in front, near the driver, a man. No, a cap, an enormous rabbit-skin cap, which said little and looked sadly at the road. All those people knew each other and kept talking about their affairs very loudly and very freely. The man from the Camargue related how he was coming from Nîmes on a summons from the examining magistrate for having stabbed a shepherd with a pitchfork. They are hot-blooded in the Camargue, and at Beaucaire, it seemed. Weren't our 2 citizens of Beaucaire wanting to cut each other's throat on account of the Virgin Mary? It seemed that the baker was from a parish long devoted to the Madonna, whom the people of Provence call La Bonne Mère, and who carries the little Jesus in her arms. The journeyman, on the other hand, sang bass in the choir of a quite new church consecrated to the Immaculate Conception, that beautiful, smiling image which is represented with outstretched arms and hands emitting rays of light. The quarrel arose over that. You would have had to see it to believe the way these 2 good Catholics behaved to each other and to their Madonnas. Immaculate. She's a fine one for you to call immaculate. What about you and your good mother? Yours got more than she bargained for in Palestine, all right. And yours, the naughty girl. Who knows what she didn't get up to? You'd better ask Joseph. One needed but to see the flash of knives to believe oneself on the harbour at Naples, and by heavens, I do believe that's how this fine theological foray would have ended if the driver had not intervened. "That's enough of your Madonnas," he said, laughing to the men from Beaucaire. "Leave that nonsense to the women folk. Men should keep out of it." Upon which he cracked his whip in a slightly sceptical way, which made everybody accept his opinion. The argument had ended, but having got going, the baker had to get rid of his surplus energy, and turning to the miserable cap, silent and sad in his corner, said mockingly to him, "That wife of yours, knife-grinder, which parish receives her favours?" There must have been something funny in this, the way everybody roared with laughter, except the knife-grinder. He didn't appear to have heard. Seeing this, the baker turned to me. "You don't know his wife, monsieur? Oh, some wife she is, all right. There aren't 2 like her in Beaucaire." The laughter was twice as loud. The knife-grinder did not move. He merely said, very quietly, without lifting his head, "Shut up, baker." But that devil of a baker had no wish to shut up. He went on worse than ever. "Fool! Any fellow with a wife like that has no call to feel sorry for himself. Never a boring moment with her about. A beauty who goes off with somebody every 6 months. She's always plenty to tell you when she gets back. All the same, it's a strange way to keep a marriage going. Just think, monsieur, they hadn't been married a year, and the wife is off to Spain with a fellow selling chocolate. The husband is left alone at home, weeping and drinking. He's like a madman. After a while, her ladyship is back again, decked out in a Spanish dress with a little drum with bells on it. We all told her, Hide yourself, he'll kill you. Kill her? That was good. They settled down together again like two little doves, and she taught him to play the drum. There was another roar of laughter. In his corner, without lifting his head, the knife grinder murmured again, "Shut up, baker." The baker took no notice and went on. "Maybe you'll be thinking, monsieur, that when she got back from Spain, her ladyship took things quietly. Not on your life. Her husband had taken it all so well. It made her want to try again. After the Spaniard, it was an officer, then a sailor, then a musician, then I can't remember them all. The joke is, each time it's the same old story. The wife goes off, the husband weeps. She comes back, he's himself again. She's always running off, and he's always taking her back. You must admit a husband like that has patience. Still, you have to take into account she's a real beauty, our little wife of a knife grinder. Good enough for a cardinal, full of life, attractive, well-shaped, and nut-brown eyes, always giving the men laughing looks. Oh, yes, by heavens, if you ever pass through Beaucaire again, my fine Parisian— Oh, shut up, please, baker, came again from the knife grinder, a heart-rending note in his voice. At that moment, the coach stopped. We were at the farm of Les Anglois. It was here the two men from Beaucaire got off, and I assure you I didn't try to detain them. Yes, he enjoyed teasing people, that baker. We could hear him still laughing when he was inside the farmyard. With those two gone, the outside of the coach seemed empty. We had left the man from the Camargue at Arles. The driver was walking on the road beside his horses. We were alone up there, the knife grinder and I, each of us in his corner, neither of us speaking. It was hot. The leather of the hood was too hot to touch. Now and then I felt my eyes close and my head became heavy. But sleep was impossible. I could still hear that, "Shut up, please," so woebegone, so subdued. Nor was he sleeping, poor fellow. From behind I could see his big shoulders shuddering, and his hand, a long, pale, simpleton's hand, trembling on the back of the seat like an old man's hand. He was crying. "Here you are, Parisian, you're there," the driver shouted up suddenly at me, and with the end of his whip he showed me my green hill with the mill perched on top like a big butterfly. I hurried to get down. As I passed close to the knife grinder, I tried to glance under his cap. I would have liked to see him before leaving. As if he understood my thoughts, the poor fellow flung up his head and looked me straight in the eyes. "Take a good look at me, my friend," he said. "And if one of these days you hear there has been a murder at Beaucaire, you will be able to say you've met the man who did it." He had a wan, sad face with little shrunken eyes. There were tears in those eyes, but in that voice there was hate. Hate, that is what becomes of the anger of weak men. If I were the knife grinder's wife, I should be on my guard.
Now we have the tale of a very proud old man, called Old Cornille's Secret.
Without a word of a lie, on the night of my arrival at the Windmill, there was a score of rabbits, sitting in a circle on the platform, warming their paws in the light of the moon. In the time it took to open a gable window, pft, the whole platform was in flight, their little white backsides scurrying away, tails in air, into the bushes. I hope very much they will come back. Someone else also, very taken aback on seeing me, is the tenant of the first floor, a sinister old owl with the head of a thinker, who has lived in the mill for more than 20 years. I found him erect and still on the driving shaft in the midst of plaster and broken tiles. He looked at me for a moment with his round eye, then, quite startled at not recognizing me, he began to go, "Ooh," "Ooh!" and to shake his grey, dusty wings laboriously. These thinkers, they never use a brush. But does that matter, such as he is with his blinking eyes and glum look? This silent tenant pleases me much better than any other, and I hasten to renew his lease. He retains, as in the past, the whole upper story of the mill with an entrance through the roof. For myself, I retain the lower story, a small whitewashed room, low and vaulted like a refectory in a monastery. It was there that an old fife player, Francais Mamaille, who comes now and then to drink a glass of mulled wine with me, told me the story the other evening of a little village drama which took place at my windmill some 20 years ago. I was moved by his tale, and I will try and retell it to you just as I heard it. Imagine for a moment that you are sitting with a pot of spiced wine before you, and that it is an old fife player who is talking to you. Our country, monsieur, has not always been the dead and songless place it is today. In former days the flour trade flourished here, and the farmers for 10 leagues around used to bring us their wheat to grind. The hills all about the village were dotted with windmills. Whichever way you looked, you could see sails turning in the mistral above the pines, and long strings of little donkeys laden with sacks going up and down the paths. And all week long it was a joy to hear on these hilltops the cracking of whips, the creaking of the canvas of the sails, and the shouts of the millers' men. On Sundays, parties of us would climb up to the windmills, and the millers would stand us all a glass of muscatel. The millers' wives were dressed like queens, with their lace fichus and gold crosses. I would always bring my fife, and they all used to dance the farandole far into the night. These windmills, you see, were not only the wealth of our land, they were its pride and joy. Unfortunately, some Frenchmen from Paris had the idea of setting up a steam-driven flour mill on the road to Tarascon. As the saying goes, everybody has a penny to spend at a new alehouse, and people began to get into the habit of sending their wheat to these fine new flour mills, and soon there was no work left for the poor windmills. For a time they tried to make a fight of it, but steam power was too much for them, and, alas and alack, one after another they were all forced to close. The little donkeys were seen no more, the fine millers' wives sold their gold crosses. No more muscatel, no more farandoles. The mistral could blow its hardest, the sails remained motionless. Then, one fine day, the local government officials had all these ruined windmills pulled down, and vines and olive trees were planted where they had stood. Yet in the midst of this catastrophe, one windmill held out and kept on bravely turning its sails despite all the steam-driven flour mills. It was the mill of old Cornille, the same one in which, at this very moment, we are spending such a friendly evening. Old Cornille was a miller who had practised his craft for 60 years, an achievement of which he was more than proud. The intrusion of the flour mills maddened him to a state of fury. For a week he was to be seen running about the village seeking support, bellowing accusations that their aim was to poison all Provence with the flour from their steam-driven mills. "Don't go near them," he would say. "Those thieves are using steam to make bread. It's an invention of the devil. I use the Mistral and the Tramontane, good winds invented by God." And he would sing the praises of the windmills, but no one listened to him. Then, in a fury, the old man shut himself up in his windmill and lived all alone, like a wild beast. He would not even let his little granddaughter remain with him, a young girl, only 15, named Vivette, whose parents were dead and who had no one else in the world except her grandfather. The poor child had to earn her own living, working on farms, harvesting, silkworm picking, or olive gathering. And yet her grandfather appeared to love the child very much. He often seemed to find himself walking 4 leagues in the heat of the day to see her at the farm where she was working. And when he was with her, he would gaze at her for hours at a time, weeping. Everybody thought the old miller had sent Vivette away to avoid the cost of keeping her, and it did him no good in their eyes to allow his granddaughter to wander from one farm to another, exposed to the coarse jokes of the shepherds and to all the misery endured by young girls in service. People also thought it disgraceful that a well-known man like old Cornille, who had always kept his self-respect, should be going about the streets like a complete vagabond, barefooted, holes in his cap, his waistband in rags. Indeed, when we older people used to see him coming into Mass on Sundays, we used to feel ashamed for him, and Cornille realized this so much he no longer dared come and sit in the churchwarden's pew. He always remained at the back of the church, near the holy water, with the beggars. There was one thing, though, about old Cornille that puzzled many people. For a long time, nobody in the village had taken him any corn, yet the sails of his windmill kept turning, as in the old days. In the evening we would meet the old man on the paths, driving his donkey laden with big sacks of flour before him. "Good evening, Cornille," the peasants would shout. "The mill's still working, is it?" "Never stops, my lads," the old man would reply cheerfully. "We don't lack for work, thanks be to God." But then, if anyone asked him where the devil he got so much work from, he would put his finger to his lips and answer solemnly, "Keep it quiet. I'm working for the export trade." Nobody could squeeze a thing more out of him. As for putting your nose inside his mill, it was useless to think of it. Not even little Vivette could get in there. Whenever you passed by his mill, you would see the door closed, the great sails always moving, the old donkey grazing on the platform, and a big, lean cat lying in the sun on the window ledge, giving you an evil look. There was something mysterious about all this, and it set people's tongues wagging. Everyone had his own theory about old Cornille's secret, but the general opinion was there were more bags of money in that windmill than there were sacks of flour. However, everything was discovered in the end. Here is how it all came out. One fine day, whilst the young people were dancing to my fife, I discovered that my eldest boy and little Vivette had fallen in love with each other. All in all, I was not too displeased, because after all, the name of Cornille was greatly respected in the district, and besides, it would be a delight to me to see that pretty little Vivette trotting about the house. Moreover, as the two of them often had the chance of being together, I decided to settle the business at once, in case of accidents. So, I went up the hill to have a word with the grandfather. You should have seen the welcome I got from the old devil. He wouldn't even open his door. I explained my business as well as I could through the keyhole, with that skinny villain of a cat spitting at me like a fiend above my head. The old man didn't give me time to finish. He shouted at me in the most rude way to get back to my flute and to go and find one of the girls from the flour mills if I was in a hurry to get my son married. Well, you can imagine how my blood boiled to be spoken to like that, but I had sense enough to control myself, and leaving the old fool to his millstones, I went home and told the children how I had been treated. The poor innocents couldn't believe it possible. They begged me to let them go up to the mill and speak to him themselves. I hadn't the heart to refuse, and off they went as fast as they could. When they got up there, old Cornille had just gone out. The door was double-locked, but the old fellow had left his ladder outside, which immediately gave the youngsters the idea of getting in by the window to see what was inside this mill everybody was talking about. The mystery deepened. The grinding room was empty. Not one sack, not one grain of corn, not the faintest sign of flour on the walls, nor on the cobwebs. There wasn't even the good, warm smell of crushed wheat that fills all windmills like a perfume. The main shaft was covered with dust, and the big, lean cat was lying asleep on it. The downstairs room had the same neglected, abandoned look. An unmade bed, a few rags, a piece of loaf on one of the steps of the stairs, and then, there, in one corner, 3 or 4 sacks which had burst open, spilling out broken plaster and other rubbish from pulled-down windmills. So that was old Cornille's secret. It was this debris of plaster, bricks and mortar that he had been promenading up and down the paths every evening, to save the honour of his mill and make people think it was still grinding wheat and producing flour. Poor old Cornille and his mill. The steam mills had robbed them of their last customer long ago. The sails had kept turning, but the millstones had nothing to grind. The two young people came back in tears and told me what they had seen. I had a feeling of deep sorrow as I listened to them. Without losing a moment, I ran to my neighbours, quickly told them the facts, and immediately it was agreed we must set off at once to Cornille's mill with all the wheat we could muster. And that's what we did. The whole village set out, and we arrived at the top of the hill with a procession of donkeys laden with corn, with real corn this time. The mill door stood wide open. In front of it, seated on a bag of plaster, was old Cornille, with his head in his hands, weeping. He had just returned, and finding someone had entered the mill whilst he was away, had realized that his sad secret was his no longer. "Woe is me," he was saying. "Now there's nothing to do but die. I have brought shame on my mill." And he sobbed as though his heart were breaking, calling his windmill all sorts of pet names, speaking to it as if it were a real person. It is then that the donkeys arrive on the platform, and we all begin to shout at the top of our voices, just as we used to in the good old days. "Hello there in the mill! Ho there, Master Cornille!" And now the sacks are piling up in front of the door, and all around the golden-brown corn is overflowing onto the ground. Old Cornille stared, his eyes wide. He had picked up some of the corn, and holding it in the palm of his hand, he was saying over and over again, half laughing and half weeping, "It's corn! Dear Lord in heaven, real corn! Let me look at it." Then, turning towards us, "Ah, I knew so well you would come back to me. Those flour millers with their steam engines, they're all a lot of thieves." We wanted to carry him on our shoulders in triumph to the village. "No, my lads, before anything else, I must go and give my mill something to eat. Just think, it hasn't been able to get its teeth into anything for such a long time." And it brought tears to our eyes to see the poor old man bustling about, slitting open the sacks, keeping an eye on the millstone as it crushed the corn and sent the fine dust from the wheat rising to the ceiling. In fairness to ourselves, you must allow us this. From that day forward, we never let the old miller want for work. But then, one morning, old Cornille died, and the sails of our last windmill stopped turning, forever this time. Cornille dead, no one took his place. What can you expect, monsieur? Everything comes to an end in this world, and we shall have to get used to the idea that the windmills are things of the past, like the boats pulled by horses up the Rhone, and our local courts of justice, and the long tailcoats with flowers embroidered on them that the men used to wear.
Following old Cornille's secret, we have a couple of fables. The first is the tragic story of the girl from Arles.
On the way down to the village from my windmill, you pass a farmhouse. It is a real Provençal farmer's house, with its red tiles, its wide expanse of irregularly placed windows, its lofty wind vane, and its pulley for hoisting the bundles of hay, brown wisps of which cling everywhere. Why did this house fill me with such a feeling of horror? Why did the sight of its large, closed gateway make my heart contract? I could not have said why, yet this house caused shivers to run down my spine. It looked too silent. No dogs barked as you passed, never the sound of voices from inside. But for the white window curtains and the smoking chimneys, you would have thought the place uninhabited. Yesterday, at the stroke of midday, I was returning from the village, and, to avoid the sun, I was walking close to the wall of the farm, in the shade of the trees. On the road in front of the farmhouse, some workmen were silently loading a cart with hay. The large door had been left open. As I passed, I glanced inside, and I saw at the back of the courtyard, with his elbows on a broad stone table and his head in his hands, a big, white-haired old man. I stopped. "Shh, it's the master," one of the men whispered to me. "He's been like that since the death of his son." Just then, a woman and a little boy dressed in black and carrying big gilt prayer books passed close to us and entered the farm. The man added, "The mistress and the younger son coming back from Mass. They go every day since the boy killed himself. Oh, monsieur, what an affliction. His father still wears the dead boy's clothes. Nobody can stop him wearing them. Get along there." The cart began to move off. Wishing to know more, I asked the driver if I could get up beside him. And it was up there, on top of the hay, that I learnt the whole of this heartbreaking story. His name was Jan. He was a fine country lad, 20 years old, open-faced, well-built, as gentle as a girl. Because of his good looks, the women used to follow him with their eyes, but he had eyes only for one of them, a girl from Arles, whom he had met one day beside the Lys in Arles. At first, everybody at the farm was not pleased. The girl was said to be flighty, and her parents were not local people. But Jan was determined to have his girl from Arles. He used to say, "I will die if she's not mine." The situation had to be accepted. It was agreed they should be married after the harvest. Well, one Sunday evening the family were just finishing dinner in the courtyard. Then a man appears at the door, and in a trembling voice asks to speak to the farmer Estève by himself. Estève gets up and goes out onto the roadway. "Master," says the man, "you are marrying your son to a hussy who has been my mistress for 2 years. What I say I can prove. See these letters. Her parents know, and they had promised her to me, but ever since your son has kept pestering her, her fine ladyship and her parents don't want anything more to do with me. But I'd have thought, after what these letters show, she couldn't become the wife of another man." Estève looks at the letters. "That settles it," he says. "Come in and have a glass of muscatel." The man replies, "Thank you, but I am not thirsty, only full of sorrow." And he goes away. The father goes back in, his face betraying nothing. He takes his place again at the table, and the meal continues merrily. That evening, Estève and his son went out together into the fields. They stayed out a long time. When they came back, the mother was still waiting for them. "Wife," said the farmer, leading his son to her, "take him to you. He is very unhappy." Jan never mentioned the girl from Arles again. But he loved her still, more even since they had proved to him she had lain in the arms of another. Sometimes he would pass whole days sitting alone in a corner. Other times he would go out onto the land and do furiously by himself the work of 10 labourers. In the evening he would take the road to Arles and walk on until he saw the slender steeples of the town rising against the sunset. Then he would turn back. Never did he go any further. Seeing him like this, always sad and alone, the people at the farm did not know what to do. They began to dread some disaster. Once, during dinner, his mother looked at him, her eyes full of tears, and said, "All right, listen, Jan. If you still want her, you shall have her." His father flushed and looked down, overcome by the shame of it. Jan shook his head and went out. From that day, his attitude changed. He pretended to be always cheerful in order to reassure his parents. He was seen again at dances, in taverns, at bull brandings. His father kept saying, "He's got over it." The mother still had her forebodings and watched her boy more than ever. Jan slept with his younger brother quite near the silkworm rearing house. The poor old woman had made a bed for herself next to their room. The silkworms might need her in the night. Then came the feast of St. Eloi, patron of farmers. Great rejoicings at the farm. There was Chateauneuf for everybody, and mulled wine flowed like water. Fireworks followed, bonfires in the yard, and coloured lanterns hung on all the trees. Everybody danced the farandole until they dropped. Jan himself actually looked happy. He danced with his mother. The poor woman wept for joy. At midnight they went to bed. Everybody was ready to fall asleep on their feet, everybody except Jan. His younger brother told later that all night Jan lay sobbing. Yes, he was still taking it very badly, poor lad. Next day, at dawn, his mother heard somebody pass through her room, running. She knew at once something was wrong. "Jan, is that you?" Jan does not reply. He is already on the stairs. Quickly, the mother gets up. "Jan, where are you going?" He goes up to the loft. She follows him. "Jan, my boy, answer me. What are you doing?" She gropes for the latch, her old hands trembling. A window opening, a body falling onto the paving stones of the yard, and all is over. The poor boy had said to himself, "I love her too much. I'm going to go away from it all." Ah, what misery the human heart can bear, but there is one burden too heavy for it, to realize we cannot stop loving the woman we have come to despise. That morning the people of the village wondered who was crying out so up at Estève's farm. There in the yard, in front of the dew-covered, blood-covered stone table, the mother, naked from her bed, was crying for her child, lying dead in her arms.
And now, on a lighter note, we have The Fable of the Man with the Golden Brain.
Once upon a time, there was a man who had a brain of pure gold. When he was born, the doctors thought that he would not live. So heavy was his head and so enormous his skull. But live he did, and grew in the sunshine like a healthy young olive tree. His huge head, however, was always getting him into difficulties. It was pitiful to see him bumping into the furniture as he walked about. He fell over often. One day he rolled right down a flight of stairs, knocked his forehead against a marble step, and his skull rang like an ingot. They thought he was dead, but on picking him up, only a slight cut was found, with 2 or 3 little drops of gold clotted in his fair hair. It was thus his parents learnt that the child had a brain of gold. The matter was kept secret. The poor little boy himself suspected nothing. From time to time he would ask why they no longer allowed him to run about in the streets in front of the house with the other boys. "You would be stolen, my treasure," his mother would reply. Then the child became very frightened of being stolen. He used to stay inside, playing all alone, saying nothing, dragging himself from one room to another. Not until he was 18 did his parents reveal to him the monstrous gift he had received from fate. And as they had fed and clothed and cared for him to that age, they asked him in return for a little of his gold. The boy did not hesitate. The very same moment, how and by what means the fable does not tell, he plucked out of his skull a piece of solid gold, as big as a walnut, and threw it proudly into his mother's lap. Then, quite dazzled by the riches he carried in his head, mad with ambitions, drunk with his power, he left his father's house and went out into the world, squandering his treasure. At the rate he lived, royally and recklessly, his treasure might have been thought inexhaustible. But exhaustible it was, and gradually his eyes were seen to become duller and his cheeks hollower. One day at last, the morning after a night of senseless debauchery, the wretched youth was struck with panic at the tremendous breach he had already made in his ingot of gold. It was time to stop. From that moment he began a new life. The man with the brain of gold went away to live alone and by the work of his hands, suspicious and fearful like a miser, out of reach of temptations. Unfortunately, a friend had followed him into his solitude, and this friend knew his secret. One night, the poor man was suddenly awakened with a pain, an excruciating pain, in his head. He jumped up distracted, and by the light of the moon he saw the friend running away, hiding something under his cloak. A little more of his brain had been taken from him. Some time after that, the man with the golden brain fell in love, and this time all was over. With all his heart he loved a little fair-haired girl who loved him also, but who loved even more frilly dresses, white feathers and pretty bronze tassels around her little shoes. In the hands of this dainty creature it was a pleasure to see the pieces of gold melt away. She was full of caprice, and he could deny her nothing. For fear of upsetting her, he even to the very end hid from her the sad secret of his wealth. "We are very rich, then?" she used to say, and the poor man would reply, "Oh, yes, yes, very rich." And he would smile with love at the little blue bird that was innocently eating his brain. But sometimes fear overwhelmed him, and he tried to spend less. Yet then his little wife would come hopping up to him, saying, "My rich, rich husband, buy me something very expensive." And he would buy her something very expensive. This went on for 2 years. Then, one morning, his little wife died, without any apparent cause, just like a bird. The treasure was nearly exhausted. With what he had left, the widower arranged a beautiful funeral for his beloved one. A full peal of bells, heavy coaches draped with black, plumed horses, tears embroidered in silver on the black velvet hangings. Nothing was too fine for her. What did his gold matter to him now? He gave it to the church, to the pallbearers, to the women who provided the wreaths. He gave it everywhere, heedlessly. So, when he left the cemetery, almost nothing remained of that marvellous brain. Then he was seen wandering the streets distractedly, groping his way with his hands, staggering like a drunkard. In the evening, when the shops were lighting up, he stopped in front of a shop window filled with a jumble of fabrics and finery glistening in the lights, and remained there for a long time, looking at 2 little blue satin boots lined with swan's down. "I know someone to whom those little boots would give a lot of pleasure," he said to himself, smiling. And no longer even remembering that his little wife was dead, he went in to buy them. The shopkeeper, in the back room of her shop, heard a great cry. She ran in and drew back with fear on seeing a man leaning sideways against the counter, staring at her as if in terrible pain. He was grasping in one hand the little blue boots lined with the swan's down, and holding out to her his other hand, all covered with blood, but with scrapings of gold on his fingernails. Although it sounds an unbelievable story, this fable is true from beginning to end. There are in this world unfortunate people who are condemned to live by their brain, and who pay in fine gold, with their marrow and their very substance, for the least things in life.
And now a story about a delightful old Provençal couple and the love they have for their grandson who lives in Paris. The old couple.
"A letter, Azin?" "Yes, monsieur. It's from Paris, monsieur." He was quite proud of it coming from Paris, was good old Azin. I wasn't. Something told me this letter from Paris, falling so unexpectedly and so early in the morning on my table, was going to rob me of my whole day. I wasn't mistaken. Hear for yourselves. "My dear friend, you must do me a favour. You will lock up your windmill for a day and go straight to Aiguière, the large village about 3 or 4 leagues from where you live. It's not far to walk. When you get there, you will ask for the convent orphanage. The first house after the orphanage is a small one with grey shutters and a little garden behind it. You will go in without knocking, the door is always open, but you will call out very loudly, 'Good morning, good people, I am Maurice's friend.' Then you will see 2 old people. Oh, they're so very old now, my friend, and they will stretch out their arms to you from their big armchairs, and you will embrace them for me with all your heart, just as if they belonged to you. Then you will talk. They will talk about me, about nothing but me. They will tell thousands of silly things, and you will listen without laughing. You will not laugh, will you? They are my grandparents, the 2 beings to whom I mean everything in life, and who have not seen me for 10 years. 10 years is a long time, but what can I do? Paris keeps me from going to them. Their great age keeps them from coming to me. Fortunately, you are there, my dear Miller, and by embracing you they will think they are embracing me a little. I have written to them often about us and about our good friendship, which I— To the devil with friendship! His confounded letter arrived on a beautiful morning. But such fine weather in Provence is not good for walking. Too much mistral, too much sun. I had already decided upon a certain sheltered spot between two rocks, and had been looking forward to remaining there all day like a lizard, drinking in the sun and listening to the song of the pines. Well, what would you have done? I grumbled, locked the mill, pushed the key into the hole cut for the cat, picked up my stick and pipe, and set off. I got to Aiguière about 2 o'clock. The village was deserted. Everybody was in the fields. In the elm trees the cicadas were singing loudly. A donkey was sunning itself in front of the mayor's office. Some pigeons were perched on the fountain outside the church, but nobody anywhere to direct me to the orphanage. By great good luck, an old witch suddenly appeared, seated at her doorstep, busy spinning. I told her what I was looking for, and since she was a very powerful old witch, she had only to lift her broom, and there was the orphanage, standing before me as if by magic. It was a large, dark, forbidding place, proudly displaying an old red sandstone cross above its arched doorway, with some words in Latin around it. Next to this building I saw a small house with grey shutters and a little garden behind it. I recognized it and went in without knocking. Always will I remember that long, quiet, cool passage, with its pink wall, the little sunlit garden shimmering behind the thin blind at the far end, and the faded flowers and the violins on the panels of the wainscoting. At the end of the passage, on the left through a half-open door, I could hear the tick-tock of a large clock and a child's voice reading aloud, as they do at school, stopping after each syllable. I approached the door softly and looked in. In the stillness and subdued light of a small room, a kindly-looking old man, rosy-cheeked and wrinkled to his fingertips, was fast asleep in a deep armchair, his mouth open, his hands resting on his knees. At his feet, a little girl, dressed in blue, a little hood and a long cape, the uniform of the orphanage, was reading the life of St. Irenaeus out of a book bigger than herself. This tale of miracles had performed a miracle upon the whole house. All slept. The old man in his armchair, the flies on the ceiling, the canaries in their cage over there on the window-sill. The big clock snored, tick-tock, tick-tock. Nothing remained awake in all the room except a broad ray of sunlight which shone between the closed shutters, a straight white beam full of living sparks and microscopic waltzes. Amidst this general slumber, the child gravely went on with her reading. Straightway 2 lions fell upon him and devoured him. It was at this point that I entered. The results were dramatic. If the lions of St. Irenaeus themselves had leapt into the room, they could not have caused more astonishment. The little girl shrieked, the big book dropped, the canaries and flies awoke, the clock struck, the old man jumped up, shaking with fright, and I myself, a little uneasy, stopped short on the threshold, where I called out very loudly, "Good day, good people, I am Maurice's friend." Oh, if you only could have seen the poor old man then, if you could have seen him come to me with wide-open arms, embrace me, shake my hands, run bewildered round the room, exclaiming, "Oh, good gracious me! Oh, good gracious me!" His face had gone quite red, and every wrinkle in it was laughing. He kept stammering, "Oh, monsieur! Oh, monsieur!" Then he went to the back of the room and called, "Mamette!" The sound of a door opening and a mouse-like pattering in the passage. It was Mamette, a dear little old woman in a beribboned bonnet and a Carmelite gown, and holding in her hand an embroidered handkerchief to do me honour, as was the fashion long ago. It touched me greatly to see how much they resembled each other. With some ribbons and bows, his name could also have been Mamette. But the real Mamette must have shed many tears in her life, because she had even more wrinkles than he. Like him, too, she was attended by a child from the orphanage, a little guardian in a blue cape who never left her. And to see those 2 old people watched over by these orphan children was more moving than anything I could ever have imagined. As she came in, Mamette had started to make me a low curtsy, but it was quickly cut short as soon as the old man said, This is Maurice's friend." She trembles, weeps, loses her handkerchief, flushes an even deeper red than he. "Quick, quick, a chair," says the old woman to her little girl. "Open the shutters," cries the old man to his. And taking me each by a hand, they lead me at a trot to the now wide-open window, in order to get a better look at me. Then the armchairs are pushed forward, I sit down between them on a stool, the little girls in blue behind us, and the interrogation begins. "How is he? What is he doing? Why doesn't he come? Is he happy?" And so on, like that for hours. I did my best to answer all their questions, giving what details I knew about my friend, shamelessly inventing those I did not know, taking special care not to confess I had ever noticed if his windows shut tight or even the colour of his wallpaper. "His wallpaper, it's blue, madame, light blue with a garland design." "Really?" exclaimed the old lady with great emotion, and added, turning to her husband, "He's such a good boy." "Indeed he is, a fine lad," the old man replied enthusiastically. And all the time I was speaking, they kept nodding their heads at each other, giving little laughs and winking in a knowing way at each other. But sometimes the old man would lean towards me and say, "Speak louder, she doesn't hear too well." Then she, in her turn, "A little louder, I beg you, his hearing is not too good." So I would raise my voice, and both of them would thank me with a smile. And they would lean forward as if seeking within my eyes some image of their Maurice. It was then that I found myself most deeply moved, for in those tired smiles of theirs I seemed myself to see the image of my friend, elusive, vague, dim, as though he was smiling at me himself from far away through a deep mist. Suddenly the old man sits up in his chair. "Mamette, I've just thought. Perhaps he's not had any lunch." And Mamette raises her hands in consternation. "Not had any lunch? Oh, gracious me!" I thought they were still going on about Maurice, and was about to say that the dear lad always made sure he lunched by midday. But not a bit of it. It was myself they were talking about, and you should have seen the fuss when I admitted that I had not eaten. "Quick, little blue ones, lay the table. Move it to the middle of the room, the Sunday cloth, the flowered plates. Quickly now, and do not laugh so much, please." And they were quick. They'd only time to break 3 plates, and lunch was served. "Now it's a good little lunch," said Mamette as she led me to the table, "but you'll have to eat alone. We had ours this morning." These old people. Whatever time you call on them, they've always had a meal that morning. Mamette's good little lunch consisted of 2 fingers of milk, some dates, and a barquette, a sort of sweetbread, enough to feed her and her canaries for at least a week. And I managed it all by myself. The indignation there must have been around that table, how the little blue ones must have whispered and nudged each other, how the canaries over in their cage must have seemed to be saying, "Oh, just look, that gentleman is eating all the barquette." I did indeed eat it all, almost without realizing it, so absorbed was I in looking around that bright room, so peaceful, so redolent of times long past. In particular, I could not take my eyes away from them. There were 2 little beds. I kept picturing those little beds, almost cradles, each morning at dawn, both still hidden behind their long fringed curtains. 3 o'clock strikes. It is the hour when all old folk find themselves awake. "Are you asleep, Mamette?" "No, my dear." "Maurice is a good boy, isn't he?" "He is indeed, a fine lad." And I imagined a whole conversation like that just from seeing those 2 old people's little beds standing side by side. Meanwhile, a terrible drama was taking place in front of the cupboard at the other end of the room. It concerned how exactly to reach, high up on the top shelf, a certain jar of cherries in brandy which had been waiting for Maurice for 10 years and which they wished to open for me. In spite of Mamette's pleas, the old man had insisted on getting the cherries himself, and having climbed onto a chair, was trying to reach up for them, to the horrified dismay of his wife. You can imagine the scene. The old man reaching up unsteadily, the little blue ones grasping his chair tightly, Mamette behind him holding her breath, her arms outstretched, and all of them enveloped in the faint perfume of bergamot from the open cupboard and its big piles of unbleached linen. I watched entranced. At last, after prodigious efforts, they succeeded in getting that famous jar down from the cupboard, and with it an old battered silver mug, the mug that Maurice had used when a child. They filled it for me to the brim with cherries. Maurice so much liked cherries. And whilst he was serving me, the old man kept whispering in my ear, as though he fancied them himself, "You're very lucky, you know, to be able to eat them. My wife bottled them. They're good, you see." Alas, his wife had bottled them, but she'd forgotten to sweeten them. But old people become absent-minded. It was what one could have expected. Your cherries were atrocious, my poor Mamette, but that did not stop me eating every single one of them, without batting one eyelid. The meal over, I got up to say goodbye to my hosts. They'd have much liked to keep me a little longer to talk about their dear boy, but the day was drawing to its close, and the mill was far away. I had to go. The old man had risen with me. "Mamette, my coat! I'm going to take him as far as the square." I'm quite certain Mamette really thought it was already too chilly for him to go as far as the square, but she also did not bat an eyelid. Only, when she was helping him get his arms into the sleeves of his coat, a fine snuff-coloured coat with mother-of-pearl buttons, I heard her say softly to him, "You won't be back too late, will you?" And he, with a roguish air, "Oh, how should I know? Perhaps." On which they looked at each other and laughed, and the little blue ones laughed to see them laugh, and over in their corner the canaries in their own way laughed also. Between you and me, I think the smell of the cherries had gone a little to the heads of all of them. As grandfather and I went out, night was falling. His little blue one followed us at a distance to take him back again, but he did not see her, and it obviously gave him great pride to walk with his arm in mine, like a man. Mamette, her face all smiles, watched this from her doorstep, and as she followed us with her eyes, she kept nodding her little head in delight, as if to say, "There, you see, he can still walk, that poor man of mine."
And now we have an account of two hostelries on opposite corners, the one busy and the other empty. The two inns.
It was while returning from Nîmes one July afternoon. The weather was oppressively hot. I had been walking for 2 hours without seeing a soul, when suddenly a cluster of white houses rose up in front of me through the dust of the road. They were what is called the posting station of St. Vincent, 5 or 6 small farmhouses, a few long red-roofed barns, a drinking trough without water under a clump of fig trees, and beyond them all 2 large inns, facing each other on either side of the road. The proximity of these inns was somehow startling. On one side, a large new building full of life and movement, the coach drawn up in front, the steaming horses being unharnessed, the passengers having a quick drink on the roadside in the narrow shade of the walls. Its yard a jumble of mules and carts. Inside, shouts, curses, banging of fists on tables, clatter of glasses, click of billiards, and overriding all this uproar, a voice singing, loudly, joyously, making all the windows shake. The inn opposite was, in contrast, silent and apparently deserted. Grass in the gateway, shutters broken, the doorsteps wedged with stones from the road. Everything was so poor, so pitiful, that it truly would be an act of charity to stop and have a drink there. On entering, I found a long, drab, empty room, which the dazzling light through the 3 large uncurtained windows made still more empty and drab. Even the furniture seemed asleep. Some rickety tables on which stood a few dusty glasses, a billiard table holding out its torn pockets as if they were beggars' bowls, a yellow sofa, an old counter. At the back of the room, in the recess of a casement window, there was a woman standing, completely absorbed in what she was looking at outside. I called to her twice. "Hey there, mistress!" She turned slowly, so that I was able to take in her poor peasant woman's face, lined, wrinkled, encircled by long pinners of reddish-brown lace, such as our old women wear. Yet this was not an old woman. Rather she was one who had known sorrow too soon and too deeply. "What is it you want?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "To sit a moment and drink something." She gave me a look full of astonishment, as if she did not understand. "This isn't an inn, then?" The woman sighed. "Yes, you can call it an inn if you like. But why don't you go over there like the others? It's much more lively." "Too lively for me. I'd rather stay here." And without waiting for an answer, I seated myself at a table. When she was quite sure I was speaking seriously, she began to move about with a very busy air, moving bottles, wiping glasses, disturbing the flies. It made one feel that a customer was quite an event. Then she went off into the room at the back. I heard her rattling large keys, struggling with locks, rummaging in the bread bin. From time to time there came a long, drawn-out sigh, a half-smothered sob. After a quarter of an hour of these goings-on, I had before me a plate of raisins, an old Beaucaire loaf as hard as grit, and a bottle of inferior local wine. "You are served," said the strange creature, and returned quickly to her place at the window. While I drank, I tried to make her talk. "You don't often have people here, do you?" "No, monsieur, never a soul. When we were on our own here, it was different. Then we had the posting station, carriages stopping, all year round. But since the people over the way came, we've lost everything. Everybody prefers to go there. It's too dull for them here. It's no use pretending it isn't. I've lost all my looks. I keep having feverish attacks since my 2 little girls died. Over there, it's just the opposite. Everybody's always laughing and joking. A woman from Arles runs it, a real beauty with lace and gold round her neck. The coach driver's her lover, so he stops the coach there now. She gets all the young fellows from Besançon, Redessin, and Jonquière. The carriers go out of their way just to call now she's there. And I'm stuck here all day, without a soul, breaking my heart." She said all this, her forehead still pressed against the window-pane. All at once, on the other side of the road, there was a great commotion. The coach was moving off in a cloud of dust. Whips could be heard cracking, a fanfare of the postillion's horn, girls shouting as they ran to the door, "Goodbye, goodbye," and above it all, that same tremendous voice ringing out more beautifully than before. At the sound of this voice, my hostess shivered from head to foot, and turning to me, said in a low voice, "Do you hear? That's my husband. He does sing well, doesn't he?" I looked at her, dumbfounded. "What? Your husband? He goes over there also." "What can you expect, monsieur? That is how men are. They don't like tears, and I am always weeping since my little ones died, and it's so sad, this big house where there's never a soul. So when he gets too bored, my poor José goes and has a drink over there. And he's such a wonderful voice. The woman from Arles makes him sing. Listen, there, he's beginning again." And trembling, with her hands raised, and with huge tears making her still uglier, she stood there at the window as if in an ecstatic trance, listening to her José singing for the woman from Arles.
We now return to myth with an unusual story about a visit to both heaven and hell by the Vicar of Cucugnan.
Father Martin was Vicar of Cucugnan. He was also a man of great and simple goodness, who loved his flock as a father loves his children. In his eyes, his parish at Cucugnan would have been paradise on earth if the people of Cucugnan could only have given him a little more satisfaction. But alas, the spiders spun their webs in his confessional, and on holy Easter days the sacrament remained unheeded at the back of the ciborium. The good priest was sore at heart, and he prayed ceaselessly that by God's good grace he might not die before he had brought his scattered flock back safely to the fold. That God heard him you shall now see. One Sunday, after the Gospel, Father Martin ascended into his pulpit. "My brethren," he said, "whether you believe what I am going to tell you is entirely your own affair. The other night I found myself standing at the gates of paradise. I knocked. St. Peter opened to me. 'Well, well, it's you, is it, good Monsieur Martin?' he said to me. 'What lucky chance brings you this way? How can I be of service to you?' 'Good St. Peter, can you tell me how many of the people of Cucugnan you have in paradise?' There's nothing I can refuse you, Monsieur Martin. Sit yourself down, and we'll look into the matter together. And St. Peter picked up his big book, opened it, and put on his spectacles. Now, let's see. Here we are, Cucugnan. My dear Monsieur Martin, the page is quite empty. Not a soul. What? No one here from Cucugnan? It's not possible. Do look again. Nobody, holy man. Look for yourself if you think I'm joking. Your people from Cucugnan must obviously be doing their little spell of quarantine in purgatory. Oh, good St. Peter, for pity's sake, let me go and see them and console them. Willingly, my friend. Wait, slip on these sandals, for the paths there aren't as good as they might be. Now, follow the path straight in front of you. Then, right down there, do you see at the bottom a turning? Well, you'll find there a silver door covered all over with black crosses. Knock at the door, and someone will open it. Goodbye, then. Keep well, and have courage. And I followed that path. What a tramp I had! That narrow path full of brambles and carbuncles that glittered and serpents that hissed led me at last to the silver door. Knock, knock. Who's knocking? Said a doleful voice. The Vicar of Cucugnan. Of Cucugnan. Ah, enter. I entered. A great, beautiful angel, with wings dark as night, with a robe bright as day, was writing in a big book more immense than St. Peter's. All right, what do you want, and what's your business? Said the angel. Beautiful angel of God, I should like to know if you've got the people from Cucugnan here. I'm their priest, you see. Ah, you're Father Martin, are you? Cucugnan, you say. And the angel opens his book and turns over the leaves. Cucugnan, he says, after giving a long sigh. Monsieur Martin, we have nobody from Cucugnan in purgatory. Oh, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, where are they then? Why, man of God, they're in paradise then. Where the deuce do you want them to be? But I've just come from there. You've just come from there? Well? Well, they're not there. Oh, Holy Mother of the Angels! You will have to face it then, Monsieur Martin. If they're not in paradise and not in purgatory, there's only one other place. They're in... Oh, Holy Cross! It isn't possible. Perhaps St. Peter wasn't telling the truth. No, I didn't hear the cock crowing. Oh, how can I go to paradise if my people of Cucugnan are not there? My poor Monsieur Martin, since you want to know the worst with your own eyes, you must take that path. On your left you will see a big gate. There you will be told everything. May God go with you. It was a long footpath, covered all the way with glowing red-hot cinders. I staggered down it as if I'd been drinking. I was soaked with perspiration, yet my feet were not burnt, thanks to the sandals which St. Peter had lent me. When I had hobbled and limped far enough, I saw on my left a door, yawning wide open, like the door of an immense furnace. Oh, my brethren, what a terrible sight it was! There, nobody asked my name. There, no register is kept. No, my brethren, that door is kept wide open, and people enter there in batches, just as on Sundays you go into the taverns. My hair was standing on end. I smelt the burning smell of roasting flesh. I could hear the most horrible howling, loud with wailing, yelling, and with curses. Well, are you coming in or aren't you? Said a demon with big horns, pricking me with his fork. Me? Oh, I'm not coming in. I'm a friend of God. You're a friend of God? Well, what are you doing here, you scurvy I've come a long way to ask you, humbly, if by any chance you have anyone here from Cucugnan. Fires of God! Don't you try to be funny with me, as if you didn't know very well all Cucugnan is here. Look over there, you ugly crow, and you'll see what we do with your precious lot from Cucugnan. And I saw, in the midst of dreadful whirling sheets of flame, big Coq-Galine. You all knew him, who was always getting drunk and beating his wife, Clairon. I saw Catherine, that little trollop who used to sleep alone in the barn. You remember her all right, my fine fellows. I saw Pascal Daudet, who used to make his oil from Monsieur Julien's olives. I saw Lawyer Grapazzi, who was so good at feathering his nest, and Dauphine, who charged so much for the water from his well, and Tortillard, who, when he met me carrying the sacrament to the dying, used to pass me by with his cap on his head and his pipe in his mouth, as if I were a dog he'd met, and Coulin, with his Zette and Jacques and Pierre and Tony. White-faced and shaking with fear, the audience groaned at seeing within the wide-open gates of hell, this one his father, that one his mother, another his grandmother, and still another his sister. You are well aware, my brethren, continued the good Father Martin, that this cannot go on. I am charged with the care of your souls, and I must save you from the abyss into which you are about to plunge head first. Tomorrow I shall set to work, and plenty of work there will be. Here is how I shall go about it. Tomorrow, Monday, I shall confess the old men and women. That will not take long. Tuesday, the infants. I shall soon be through with them. Wednesday, the boys and girls. That may take quite a time. Thursday, the men. We'll cut that as short as possible. Friday, the women. I'll say now, I don't want any long tales. Saturday, the miller. He'll need a whole day to himself, at least. And if we finish by Sunday, we'll be lucky. You see, my children, when the corn is ripe, it has to be cut. When the wine is drawn, it has to be drunk. And when there is enough dirty linen, it has to be washed, and it has to be washed well. What was said was done. The dirty linen was washed. Ever since that memorable Sunday, the sweet scent of the virtues of Cucugnan perfumes the air for 10 leagues around.